You've been lied to about what strength looks like, not by your enemies, by the version of yourself you've been defending for years. You've lost arguments you should have won, not because you were wrong, but because you reacted before you thought. You've damaged things you built for years, in a single moment where your emotions moved faster than your judgment. You've watched yourself become someone you didn't recognize, and called it passion, called it principle, called it standing your ground. But it wasn't any of those things. It was just fear wearing the face of strength. In the next 35 minutes, you're going to understand something the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago, something Marcus Aurelius tested against the weight of an empire, something Epictetus discovered in the worst possible place a man can find himself. And once you understand it, you won't be the same. Not because you'll feel differently, because you'll see differently. This channel exists for one kind of man, not the man who wants to feel better, the man who wants to become harder to move. If that's you, stay with me. What I'm about to show you will change the architecture of how you think. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome for nearly 2 decades. He commanded armies. He navigated betrayal from people he trusted. He buried children. He watched a plague tear through his empire while managing a war at its borders. And every single morning, before the world demanded anything from him, he sat alone and wrote. Not orders, not strategy. He wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't writing that for posterity. He was writing it because he needed to hear it, because even the most powerful man in the world woke up every morning having to remind himself of the same truth. The battle is never out there. Think about the last time someone genuinely threw you off. Maybe it was a word said in the wrong tone, a look, an email. Maybe someone questioned your judgment in front of others. Maybe someone left without explanation. Now, how long did that live in your head? Hours? Days? Did it crawl into conversations that had nothing to do with it? Did it follow you into sleep? That's not the other person's power over you. That's your own mind, running a program you never consciously installed. Here's what I want you to understand. And this is something most people never see, because it hides in plain sight. You are not reacting to what happened. You are reacting to what you believe it means. And those two things are completely different. I'm going to show you exactly where that belief comes from, and more importantly, how to dismantle it. But first, you need to understand something about how your brain actually works under threat. When something triggers you, a harsh word, a sudden threat, an unexpected challenge, your brain doesn't pause to consult reason. It fires. The amygdala, the brain's oldest alarm system, sends a signal through your entire nervous system in milliseconds. Adrenaline floods your blood. Cortisol spikes. Your heart rate climbs. Your breathing shortens. And here is what almost no one tells you. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for judgment, long-term thinking, and self-awareness, begins to go offline. You are, quite literally, no longer thinking clearly. You just don't feel that way. Because fear and anger come with the sensation of absolute certainty. That's the trap. Epictetus knew this. He didn't have neuroscience. He had something better. He had lived experience of what happens to a man who has no control over his circumstances. He was a slave. And from that position, stripped of every external freedom a man can have, he arrived at the one truth that no one could take from him. Men are disturbed not by the things that happen, but by the opinions about the things. What Epictetus discovered in chains is something that most free men never find, because freedom itself becomes a trap. When you can change your circumstances, you spend your whole life trying to change them instead of changing yourself. But here's the question that will make this personal. What if the thing you keep reacting to isn't about the other person at all? What if it's pointing directly at something unresolved inside you? That's the part nobody wants to hear. And it's the part that changes everything. There's a moment in every trigger, if you're honest enough to look for it, where the emotion isn't really about the present. It's about an echo. Someone dismisses you in a meeting. The anger that rises isn't just about that moment. It carries the weight of every time you've been dismissed. Every time your voice didn't land. Every time being overlooked taught you, silently, without words, that your presence might not be enough. Someone questions your judgment. The defensiveness that surges isn't just pride. It's the accumulated fear of being exposed as less than what you've worked to appear. Someone goes cold without explanation. The anxiety that follows isn't about them specifically. It's about an older wound, one that learned early on that distance means danger. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is what he meant in practice. You're not losing control of a situation. You're losing control to a story. One written years ago by a younger version of you who needed it to survive. And now that story runs in the background of your life like code you forgot you wrote. The question that will change your life is not why are they like this? It's why does this hit me this hard? Because two people can receive the exact same insult and respond completely differently. One man brushes it off. The other stews in it for 3 days. The insult didn't change. What changed is what it touched inside. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. And if you've been honest with yourself this far, you'll feel this land. Most of the emotional suffering you carry isn't being done to you. It's being done by you. Not consciously, not with malice, but through a mechanism so automatic you've never thought to question it. I'm going to name that mechanism now. And once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. Most men are carrying a set of invisible contracts, agreements they never consciously wrote but live by every day. If I work hard, I should be recognized. If I'm loyal, I should receive loyalty. If I treat people with respect, I should be respected. If I show up, I should matter. These aren't unreasonable beliefs. In isolation, they reflect values. But they become traps the moment you confuse them with guarantees. Because the world doesn't honor contracts, it was never shown. The colleague who dismisses your work didn't sign your contract. The partner who doesn't see your effort never read the terms. The friend who fades without explanation was never bound by your expectations. And when reality fails to honor the contract, the gap between what you expected and what arrived becomes the pain you can't explain. Not injustice, just the cost of mistaking a value for a promise. The Stoics had a name for this work. They called it amor fati, love of fate, not passive acceptance, not resignation, but the active, practiced choice to stop fighting the fact that life will not arrange itself around your preferences. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." He wasn't talking about optimism. He was talking about the radical decision to stop spending energy on what should have happened and direct it entirely toward what to do next. Understanding this is one thing. Living it under pressure is another. And this is exactly where most people stop. Because they can understand Stoic philosophy intellectually and still fall apart the moment someone says the wrong thing in the wrong tone. The reason that happens isn't weakness, it's physics. And what I'm about to show you is the specific mechanism that makes the difference between a man who understands calmness and a man who has it. Viktor Frankl survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother. He lost everything except one thing, and he knew it because he saw men around him who lost it too. He wrote, Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That space, that is the entire game, not the trigger, not the response, the space between them. Every man who appears unshakable, who you've watched handle pressure and thought, how does he do that, is not someone who feels less than you do. He's someone who has made that space longer. In practical terms, this is what it looks like. Someone says something that stings. In an untrained mind, the signal goes from trigger to reaction. Instant. No space. The emotion speaks before the man does. In a trained mind, the signal goes from trigger to awareness, to choice, to response. The difference isn't personality. It's a practiced pause. And here's the part that matters most. You don't build that pause in the heat of the moment. You build it every day in the small moments nobody sees. Every time you feel irritation rising and you breathe through it instead of feeding it, that's a rep. Every time someone says something that stings and you wait 3 seconds before responding, that's a rep. Every time you choose to feel the anger fully and still decide what to do with it consciously, that's a rep. The Stoics called this ascesis, training, not inspiration, not insight. Discipline repeated until it becomes reflex. But there's a level beyond the pause that almost no one reaches, and it's the level that separates the man who manages his emotions from the man who is genuinely free from being controlled by them. It's not about control, it's about something the Stoics called Apatheia, and it's been badly misunderstood for 2,000 years. What it actually means will surprise you. When most people hear the word Stoic, they picture a man who feels nothing. Cold, detached, a wall with a face. That is not Stoicism. That is its worst misreading. Apatheia, the Stoic ideal, doesn't mean the absence of emotion. It means the absence of being ruled by emotion. The difference is everything. A man with apatheia still feels anger. He still feels grief. He still feels love. But none of these states become his commander. He feels the anger and decides whether it serves the moment. He feels the grief and lets it move through him without becoming it. He feels the love and chooses it consciously rather than being helplessly swept into it. This is what Marcus Aurelius was building, day by day, in those private journals. Not the suppression of his humanity, the governance of it. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. The emotions aren't the enemy, they are the friction. And a man who has learned to use friction rather than be destroyed by it is the closest thing to unbreakable you will ever see." Think about what that means for your life. Not a life without conflict. Not a life without pain. Not a life where people can't hurt you. A life where what people do with their pain can no longer decide what you do with yours. Here's what I haven't told you yet, and this is the part that ties everything together. The reason most men can't hold this ground when it actually matters, even when they understand it intellectually, is not because they lack discipline. It's because they're still protecting something, an identity, a self-image, a story about who they are that requires the world to behave a certain way in order to stay intact. And that identity, the one you've been defending without knowing it, is the real source of your reactivity. Let me show you exactly what I mean. At some point in your life, you built a version of yourself. Smart, strong, capable, respected, unforgettable, decent, good. This wasn't vanity. It was survival. The world asked you to be something, and you became it. But somewhere in that process, you stopped separating who you are from how you need to be seen. And now, anytime someone challenges the image, a criticism, a dismissal, a failure, a contradiction, the response isn't just discomfort. It's threat. Because the ego doesn't distinguish between an attack on your idea and an attack on your existence. It treats both the same way. Fight, defend, survive. This is why intelligent men get pulled into stupid arguments. This is why capable men buckle under criticism that, objectively, doesn't matter. This is why the most composed person in the room will suddenly lose it over something that seems completely disproportionate. The issue was never the argument, the criticism, the comment. The issue was what those things threatened underneath. Socrates said, "The first step to wisdom is knowing you know nothing." He didn't mean intellectual humility as a polite gesture. He meant stop making your identity the thing at stake in every encounter. Because when your identity is at stake, every conversation becomes a battlefield. Every disagreement becomes an existential threat, and you can't think clearly in a war zone, even one you're imagining. So what's the alternative? Because telling a man to stop protecting his ego without giving him something real to stand on instead is just philosophy that sounds good in isolation and dissolves the moment life tests it. What I'm about to describe is not a concept. It's a practice. The same practice Marcus Aurelius returned to every morning for 20 years. And it is, I believe, the single most important thing a man can build. If your identity depends on being seen a certain way, you will always be fragile. If your identity depends on outcomes going a certain way, you will always be anxious. If your identity depends on other people behaving a certain way, you will always be reactive. But there is a version of identity that cannot be threatened, not because it is defended, but because it is not attached to anything external. The Stoics called it virtue, and they meant something specific by it, not morality as performance, not goodness as reputation, virtue as the quality of your inner actions. The question you come back to is not, how am I seen? It is, am I acting in accordance with who I choose to be? When a man's identity is rooted in the quality of his actions, not the results of his actions, not the reception of his actions, he becomes almost impossible to destabilize, because no one can take that from him. Marcus Aurelius was stripped of victories, betrayed by those he trusted, undermined by people he'd elevated, and every morning he came back to the same question. Did I act well? Did I choose the right thing, regardless of how it landed? That question is the anchor. When you operate from that anchor, something changes in how you move through the world. You stop needing to win the argument because being right is no longer your identity. You stop needing the apology because your peace is no longer held hostage by someone else's admission. You stop needing every room to validate you because you stop making their judgment the measure. This is not cold. This is not detached. This is the deepest form of freedom a man can know. Every concept in this video is worthless without what comes next. Because the Stoics didn't just philosophize, they trained every single day. Here is how you build what we've been describing, not as theory, as lived reality. The first practice is called premeditatio malorum, the morning rehearsal. Before the day begins, before the world makes its demands, the Stoics would sit with what could go wrong, not to invite misery, not to catastrophize, but to rehearse the response. Today, someone may criticize my work. How will I receive it? Today, plans may fall apart. How will I adjust without losing my ground? Today, someone I trust may disappoint me. Can I hold my center? This is not pessimism. This is preparation. The man who has rehearsed difficulty is not surprised by it, and the man who is not surprised by difficulty is not controlled by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." He wasn't predicting disaster. He was removing its power to hijack him. The second practice is the 3-second pause. When you feel the heat rise, the first sign that you're being triggered, do not speak. Count to 3. Not in your head at speed. Actually pause for 3 full seconds. In that pause, ask one question. Is my next action going to serve the moment or just the emotion? That question is the bridge between the primitive brain and the thinking brain. It won't always be easy. Some moments will make 3 seconds feel like torture. That's not weakness. That's the system working correctly. The discomfort is the resistance you're training against. The third practice is the observer's frame. In any heated moment, step outside yourself mentally. Imagine you are watching this scene from above, not you experiencing it. A man named you in this situation, making a choice. What does the best version of that man do? This creates the crucial separation between the emotion and the identity. You are not the anger. You are not the fear. You are the one watching those things, and the one who gets to decide what happens next. Jung described this as the difference between being possessed by a complex and observing it. When you observe, you are free. The fourth practice is reframing the trigger as training. Every moment that challenges your composure is not an attack. It is a rep. The colleague who dismisses you is not your enemy. He's your training partner. The situation that didn't go as planned is not a failure. It's resistance, the kind that builds strength. When you genuinely adopt this frame, your relationship to difficulty transforms completely. You stop dreading the hard moments and start expecting them, not with dread, but with the quiet readiness of a man who knows what he's training for. The fifth practice is the evening reckoning. Seneca did this every night without exception. Before sleep, review the day. Not to judge yourself harshly, not to celebrate, to see clearly. Where did I lose the space between trigger and response? Where did I act from the anchor, from virtue, rather than from ego? What would the man I'm becoming have done differently? This is not self-punishment. It is self-knowledge. And self-knowledge is the foundation on which everything else is built. I want to be honest with you about something. This work is never finished. Marcus Aurelius didn't achieve permanent Stoic peace and spend his days in serene detachment. He woke up every morning and chose it again. And some days he failed. What made him exceptional was not that he was beyond human struggle. It was that he never stopped returning to the practice. That's what you're building. Not a state, a direction, not a destination, a discipline. Every time you feel the heat rise and choose the pause, you're building. Every time you catch yourself running a script that belongs to an old wound and choose to rewrite it, you're building. Every time you anchor your identity not in how you're seen, but in how you act, you're building. And what you're building doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk into rooms demanding to be noticed. It just stands. When the pressure is highest and everyone else has been moved, it stands. When the insult lands and every instinct says fight back, it considers and then decides. When loss comes, and it will come, it grieves and keeps walking. That is not coldness. That is not the absence of feeling. That is a man who has learned to carry his own weight, and sometimes the weight of others, without being crushed by it. The Stoics had a word for this man, Sophos, the sage. Not a perfect man, not an untouchable man. A man who has done the work, who keeps doing the work, and who is no longer surprised by his own nature. A man who knows that the storm will come, and has decided, long before it arrives, who he will be inside it. That is the man this channel is built for. If you found something in this video that you've been looking for, I need you to do one thing. Not subscribe, not share. Tomorrow morning, before the world starts pulling at you, sit for 5 minutes. Ask yourself what today is likely to bring that will test your composure. Rehearse your response and see what changes. If this work is yours, this channel will be here. Every video builds on what came before. Every concept goes deeper than the last. The path doesn't end here. This is just the beginning of it.